All right, this is Coding Your Career. I am Jonathan, and I am joined by Doug today. What's up, Doug?
Not much, John. Everything is going great.
So today we're going to do a mock C#.NET interview. I've interviewed people before for positions in .NET and C#, and I wanted to simulate the interview experience. Obviously, this is not for a real job, but what kind of questions could you expect? How should you answer? And basically, what red flags are interviewers looking for? What green flags? I always feel like people focus on the red flags and never really focus on the green flags. Like what are good things you can do that would make them more likely to hire you? So Doug, why don't you introduce yourself and give us a little bit about your background?
I'm Doug. I'm from Michigan, and I'm actually in the audiovisual installation community at this point. So I'm actually a developer for exclusively audiovisual projects, mainly in corporate and other commercial environments. But if you've ever been in a corporate boardroom or corporate conference room that has more use than, say, a TV, I'm probably the guy that would write the code to make that work. Meeting room, conference room automations.
Oh, then what's your interest in C# then?
So one of the manufacturers that we use operates using a Linux box. And what they do is they run a C#, or we can effectively write a C# program for use in that box.
So basically what we're going to do is, this is not going to be, they're not going to be any coding challenges. So that will be in a later video where I handle how to handle like DSA, data structures and algorithms type questions. This is more for a mid-sized company. So one thing I always tell people is that different sized companies have different interviews, right? Mid-sized companies don't care about like the data structures and algorithms because frankly speaking, they're never going to have 100 million customers. So if you don't have 100 million customers, then figuring out the big O of something is not that huge of a deal. I'd still say it's important, but I don't think you have to be like a master at it. So what they tend to do is they tend to focus more on knowledge questions. What is your knowledge of C#? What is your knowledge of .NET? What have you built with it? What's your experience? This is going to be the format we're going to do going forward. So essentially what they're going to do is they'll sit you in a room and it'll be all like, usually for a dev team is actually not that intimidating. They're just usually wearing like normal clothes. I'm just going to ask you a bunch of C#.NET questions and answer to the best of your ability. And then after each question, I'll tell you what you did, what you could do better, that sort of thing.
Sounds good.
All right. Ready to rock?
Yes, sir.
All right. First question. What are some common mistakes developers make when working with collections in C#?
Generally, the most common mistake that I've done is not understanding that collections require callback functions. So trying to do trying to search through a collection and just being like, yeah, I want P to equal P. That's totally fine, right? No, you actually need to set up a callback to make sure that as you're iterating through the function, you are pulling out the correct instance.
Okay. Anything else?
Maybe confusing which collection you're supposed to be using for any given moment.
Okay.
Arrays versus lists, or lists versus hash sets, et cetera, et cetera.
Okay. So the first part I would say is you don't necessarily need callbacks when working with lists. If you're like looping through them, but you don't, callbacks are not as big of a thing in C# as they are in like JavaScript, for example.
Specifically, when I've done them, it's been mainly for filtering out items and creating a new list based on items in said list.
Ah, okay. I got you. Got it. Okay.
It's not just, is P equal to P? It's, is P equal to P? And if P is equal to P, spit out into new list.
Ah, okay. Have you ever used LINQ before?
That's exactly what I'm referencing, is using LINQ in the for my collections, specifically using LINQ in my collections.
Okay. All right. See, so it's good that you name dropped there. The question was, it was good that you went with something that you've actually done before, because that's a good way for you to like sneak in your experience. You know what I'm saying? So it's like, when I've used this, that's a good way of framing it, right? You don't want to give it too much of a, like, you do want to give an answer, but you don't want to give like a textbook answer, like you just memorized it. You want to let your audience know that you've worked with .NET and C#. You probably wanted to name drop LINQ a little bit beforehand, though, just to let them know that's what, because that's pretty much what people use when working with collections and querying them. Although it does use a callback, so that's actually, most people don't actually know that behind the scenes that's what's actually happening when you're using like lambdas, is that lambdas are actually functions you're passing in, and you're doing a callback, so that's good. kind of take it. Let's go a little bit further because you did say something to the second part I thought was very good. Figure out which collection you're supposed to be using. Like, how delve into that a little bit more for me, please.
Specifically, I called out lists and hash sets. Hash sets are much more efficient, and they're mainly used for, again, if you want to quickly pull objects in and out without having to track where they're located in said hash set. Whereas list, you can actually iterate through it as you want. You can actually literally treat it like an array and give it a I want whatever is at index 4 or 10 or what have you. Hash sets, you don't have that functionality or as much of that functionality. Hash sets also they clear out the duplicates. Link or lists, you have duplicates.
You could have duplicates, not necessarily you have them.
You are allowed to have duplicates in lists, not so with hash sets.
For example, modifying a collection while you're iterating over it. All right, that's a common mistake developers make. You'll do a for loop, and then you'll try to remove or add an item to the loop you're iterating through. Can't do it. Yeah. Another one is forgetting null references or not setting the list capacity in the beginning. And then later on, they get a null reference. Why did I get a null reference? Because you didn't initialize the list. So that's like those little things. Getting into lists versus hash sets, you might want to also include arrays in there. So what's the big difference between arrays and lists?
Honestly, I don't really know, other than the fact that lists seem to be... Oh, no, I'm sorry. I take that back. I do know the difference between arrays and lists. Arrays are for more like your basic objects, so your ints, your strings, just other very basic objects, compared to lists, which they don't care. If you make a custom object, if you make Doug's object, you could create a list of Doug's objects and have multiple versions of that. You can't do the same thing with an array.
I would have to beg to differ a little bit there. You actually can use your custom classes with arrays.
I did not know that.
You can have an array of Doug's object. You totally 100% can. The main difference between them, Doug, is that arrays, you need to know how much the size of the array is when you make the array. So, for example, you need to know from the offset, this array is of size 5. It holds 5 things. And then once you make it an array that holds 5 things, later on, you can't change the size. You can't make it hold 4 things. You can't make it hold 10 things. This array holds 5 things of whatever type of data. Lists are resizable. So lists can remove or add things on the fly.
Gotcha. Okay.
For this question, one of the big things, so here's the way I usually do with interviews. My big strategy is start off to get, so basically there's what they're asking for. And then there's what I call the bonus round. So you want to get what they're asking for knocked out as quickly as possible so you can get into the bonus round. And what's the bonus round? I'm going to show you how deep my knowledge goes here. And I want to make sure that I'm not crowding out time for the first part and want to get into the second part, because the second part is going to impress the interviewer more than the first part. Hi, my name is Jonathan Hopp, and if you're enjoying this tutorial, I invite you to visit my website, codingyourcareer.com. I've got courses on Java, JavaScript, TypeScript, and all of the famous frameworks like React and Angular, the kind of things you'll need in order to break into the world of tech and get the knowledge that you need. It's even great for people who are already in tech and want to level up their skills. So it's codingyourcareer.com. Let's continue with the tutorial. So, for example, here's how I might answer the question. Lists are resizable. You can add or remove objects from a list as you please, whereas arrays are fixed size. Okay, we use arrays whenever we have a sort of situation where we want to control how much memory we're using. So I want to set aside this many pieces of memory from the beginning. Using lists can grow without bound in cases where we may be working with a large amount of data. It may be more convenient, but we also don't have a cap on our memory.
Close to textbook, but not actual textbook. Here's where you can expound on that. Got it. Exactly.
And that's where you show, because the whole thing you want to show is your expertise, right? That you have practical expertise, that you've worked with C# and .NET just as a human being. And then also you have the deeper computer science knowledge of what's actually going on under the hood, so that they can trust you to solve problems, basically. All right, let's go to the next one. What's the difference between string and string builder, and when would you use one over the other?
So string specifically, it's not static, but it's hard.
There's another fancy word. I know what you're searching for.
Yeah. So let me go into what string builder is. String builder is malleable. So instead of having to be reinstantiated every single or effectively having a new instance of memory allocated to that string variable whenever there's a modification, what String Builder does is it is mutable and can actually append or change as it's going along without being too disruptive to memory.
Okay, so strings are immutable, okay, meaning that they cannot be mutated. You can't change them. So when we do operations with strings, you're actually not taking the original string and changing it. You're saying, okay, the original string stays here, and here's a copy of it with the change.
Mm-hmm.
Whereas with String Builder, then it's mutable, right? So we're essentially wrapping in the class. And we can go, if we ever have a chance where we have to use lots of strings or make lots of changes to strings, it's more memory efficient.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, that was a good. Actually, that's a very good answer. I like how you pivoted to String Builder first. That's a thing I think a lot of people don't do in interviews, is that if they encounter like when you don't immediately remember the thing, you try to drill into it, and then you stay on that topic for too long, and there's dead air when you could be talking and talking about something you actually know about.
Yeah, it's like real quick. I know what this isn't. I know what this is. Let me go to the thing that I know what it is.
Exactly. Because here's the thing. To me, like interviews are like video games. I know it sounds weird, but I'm trying to rack up bonus points. I'm trying to do combos and get points as I go along. And if there's dead air, or if you're really thinking about something, you're not earning points.
And your combo's broken. You're trying to now recover afterwards.
Right, exactly. Also, I think if this were a real interview, I also would get a general sense that you do know what you're talking about. Maybe just you lack a little bit of experience. These words, immutable, you want to make certain that you practice them a little bit, because you want to be able to snap them off. All right, because that kind of shows that you took the time to study, basically.
Gotcha.
Oh, all right, let's kick it up a notch then. What are extension methods in C#? And can you give me an example of how they work?
Extension methods I have not worked too much with, but they allow you to extend out certain things. For instance, expanding out to, say, changing like a dot equals method. So you can actually add on to certain objects without actually creating an instance of said object or altering the instance of said object.
Okay, so that's a really good answer. So essentially what we're doing is that we don't really want to change the original object or what it does or how it's set up. We want to add additional functionality onto it, like Legos, basically. How would you accomplish that code-wise?
You would have actually, I do not know. I'm not going to bullshit because it's not real, because I actually do not know. I have never actually worked with extension methods, and the little bit of research that I could do, I wasn't seeing a whole lot of really viable information, just because it seems like all the things that I would want to use an extension method for is already done. So it's already part of the method. I don't need to make another dot equals. I have dot equals.
Okay, so there's a couple of things we want to make certain that we're getting clear here. So I do, the fact that you said you didn't know, one of the things I always warn people about with interviews, it's worse for you to say something that's really like confidently wrong, like major league wrong, than it is for you to say, I don't know. And that's counterintuitive.
To me, it's not, because if I say I'm wrong, it means that I'm actually willing to admit that I make a mistake, that I have gaps in my memory, and that I need clarification, compared to I am constantly going to bullshit my way through this, because it's okay. This guy has no idea what he's talking about, and we don't know if he's going to actually ask a question when he doesn't know what he's talking about.
Because here's the thing. If someone BSs me in an interview, they're going to BS me while they're at work. And then what happens when I give you something to do? How confident am I that you're going to be able to get it done? None, because you'll just say yes to my face, and then 2 weeks later it's all in shambles. So it's a trust issue.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, if I don't know about something, I'll just flat out say I don't know. Some people will try to give what little they know about it, but if I only know a little bit about it, it's not really worth it. You see what I'm saying?
Yeah, it's either and you confidently know, or you don't know, and you're just flubbing it.
Exactly, and it's really a trust issue, because a lot of people come to these interviews, like a lot of times, like nowadays. Like, I know the focus is on the employer and like how they interview people, but I think not enough attention is paid to people who come to these interviews trying to game them, or trying to they don't have the expertise, but they're hoping they can squeak through. That wastes everybody's time, to be perfectly honest with you. Like, I've interviewed people where I thought to myself, man, that guy did not really understand what I just asked him at all. Went off to the stratosphere. Okay, so here's a couple things, a couple pieces of clarification. So with equals method, that's an override. So when the reason that happens is because do you know the parent object in C sharp? Like, what do all classes inherit from in C sharp?
That I don't know.
The object class. So there's an object class in C sharp because
Okay.
it's object oriented programming, and it says, cool, like everything is an object because you inherit from object. Okay, that's like the parent, the umbrella class to everything. That has an equals method. So because it has an equals method, then its classes that inherit from it can override it, basically saying, yeah, you have your equals method. So that's not extending it because equals already existed in the object class. It's already there. We're just changing how it works.
Gotcha.
So that would be an overriding, changing how the thing works, and I want to do my own thing. Extension methods are, this thing doesn't actually do this. Okay, so it doesn't actually have this functionality. One common thing you'll see for extension methods, for example, is converting one object to another kind of object. And so that's not something that the class needs to be able to do, but I want to add on to it, but I don't want to put that data in, that logic inside of the class itself.
Gotcha.
So the way you accomplish this is by writing a static class with a static method. And then you'll use the this keyword. So later I can show you an example how that works, but it's a common pattern. So what will happen is that you'll have this keyword inside of a static method in a static class. And then you basically allow this other class to just basically add on this functionality without changing the original class.
Gotcha. You don't want, again, I guess if I'm taking a car, I don't necessarily want to be able to rip off both wheels and call it a motorcycle.
Right.
But there should be a motorcycle that can drive on two wheels.
So you, like, for example, take the car example, right? I've got my car, it's got 4 doors, I can turn on the engine. All right. But I'd like to be able to, like, I don't know, put like an exhaust port on the back and pop it on, right? I don't want to change the car itself. Like, I want to, like, keep the car as it is, but I want to be able to pop something else on so it can do something extra.
Gotcha.
So extension methods, you may or may not always use them. If you're working on APIs, they're basically for like DTOs, but it just depends. How do you feel you did in the C# section?
Honestly, there's a lot that I did not know that I really should know. Sorry, not that I should know, but stuff that I'm very interested in learning. Specifically that extensions method thing. Because I haven't done a whole lot with it, but at the same time, now that I'm hearing that, I'm like, I can think of a couple different instances where that would actually be incredibly useful that I might be implementing in some of my other projects.
Good. So that touches on something you might want. That's a good thing to say during an interview, is because here's why that's an effective thing to say. Number one, that means you code not just for work, but coding is something that you want to study and do and understand and that sort of thing. You know what I'm saying? You're going to, even though you may not know everything, which by the way, no one in their right mind should expect that, you are going to grow. All right. That's like, especially for like mid-level jobs that you would be going for, you want to show a sense of growth, right? Yeah, sure, I don't know everything there is to know about C#, but I can grow into it, that kind of thing. The second thing is willingness to learn. So you're not hard-headed. And these are personality things, right? No one wants a hard-headed person. This is it, and my way or the highway. And so no one needs that.
It's a lot of extra stress you don't have to worry about.
So that sort of thing. You come off as very even-keeled, easily teachable, easy to learn, not combative in anything. Just want to make sure that your delivery is also pretty good too. So it's just getting some of this terminology down. You know what I'm saying? It like the original, we don't modify the original class. We extend it with the static class, like that sort of thing. Making sure we're hitting these keywords, because if we don't hit these keywords, then you sound a little bit too novice.
Got it. It shows your inexperience. Maybe even shows your lack of education, even if your stuff still shows that you didn't go through the proper way of getting to this position.
Don't get me started on that one.
I know your thoughts on that.
I didn't take college classes in like computer science. I just read stuff. But I did realize once I started getting more like mid-level senior interviews, not knowing vocab really hurt me. Like I had one interview that was absolutely awful because I didn't know the terminology, but I could code it for you. Like I can make the whole thing work, but I had no idea. Oh, this is called the 4 pillars of OOP. It's called not shooting yourself in the foot with your program from my perspective. But you have to call them by the right name, and these are the four categories. And when you don't do that, they don't take you seriously.
Yeah, you sound, again, lack of experience and lack of education,
quote unquote. The interviews, again, are trust building exercises. I don't really think people take interviews enough with that mindset of this is a trust building exercise, but it is.
Yeah, no, that makes sense.
All right, let's get to .NET. Now, I know .NET is not something you've worked with too much. Have you ever worked with APIs at all, really?
I have worked with APIs. I've worked with code that has interacted with APIs, even though I myself have not directly created that code. I've worked adjacent to it.
You use the API to give you some data that you needed, or
whatever. Yeah, effectively, the way I understand it is you do a get or post or whatever REST keyword you want to use to a specific URL, and then that URL has either information that you want to get, something that you want to post, or I think what's the one that's now
do you know the verbs?
Deprecated. I know get, I know post, I know there's one that is deprecated that I can't remember right now, but it's the one that modifies. It was the one that came before post. Patch. That's what I'm
Patch is still in use.
Really? Cool. Then what is it used for?
Okay, so this is a common one, and this is again more of showing off your understanding. So the HTTP verbs are just standard verbs. There you already got get and post, perfect, right? There's put and patch, which are both updates, but I'll explain in a second what the difference is. And then there's delete.
Yep.
I think delete straightforward, doesn't really require much introduction. Just like it tells you what it does. So with patch and put, patch is for when you want to update one property of the resource, and put is when you want to update the entire resource. So what I mean by resource is, so for example, you have an API where you have like users. So it'll have like /users get, right? They'll get you a list of users in JSON format. If you do patch user, maybe you're just updating just whether they're a premium member or not, right? It goes from true to false or false to true. So it's just one aspect of the user you are patching, like I think like patching your house, right? Put is here's the whole user object with all my changes. Here you go. This is in the category of what I would say are the fundamentals of the fundamentals. So like when working with APIs, you do need to know what the verbs are. Like it's just, when I teach boot camps, I have my students like literally memorize them. And I will just like every morning, what are the verbs? What are the verbs? Because that's how the REST APIs work. That's one of the core things. All right. So since you haven't worked too much with APIs, and some of this stuff might be just a learning experience. So you do have they wouldn't in a real interview, if you didn't have too much experience with it, they wouldn't interview you with. I'm saying because otherwise it's just a waste of their time. But
what's the way interviewing about APIs when we could either interview someone else or we could broach a subject that you actually do know type of deal.
Exactly. And they should know beforehand that this is not a subject you're too up on. But at the same time, I did want to put you in a situation where you may know something, but you may not know everything, and see how you react.
Sounds good.
All right. So I don't know if you've ever done this before, but how would you go about handling configuration and secrets in a .NET application?
Okay. So I actually do know a fair amount of configuration because we use JSON configurations or JSON configuration files for some of our more advanced setups. I actually have a project that I'm working on that's using a JSON configuration thing, and I am struggling with it, but it's a different story. Now, as for secrets, I don't know anything about secrets. I should probably know a bit more because of the work I do with passwords and whatnot. I don't actually know of how secrets work or how to encode the files as they're being stored on the actual processor. To me, that's what a secret is. Secret is an API key that nobody should know, or a password that nobody should know, or what have you, that's been encrypted and then stored locally so that the program can decrypt it, but the humans looking at it can go, that's a load of nothing.
Okay, so first off, that was really good because it shows you understand what the problem we're trying to solve for. So first off, you told me what secrets were. Pinpoint, you gave me the top two things that people have as secrets: API keys and passwords. Nobody should know what those are. And so we put them in JSON. Usually in a .NET application, you have an app settings.json, which is one of your, which works exactly the same as the JSON config you have for your program. I'm sure it does. And .NET loads that file in, but what .NET gives us was called the user secrets. It exists on your computer, nobody else's, and you just point and click and say, here's my secret, like my API key is this and my password is that, and the database connections. The third most common thing is database connection strings. So like connecting to a database, you obviously don't want a hacker to have that. So all that is on your computer, and in the app settings.json, it's left blank. So if a hacker gets your JSON file, congratulations, here's a bunch of blank strings with nothing in them. Have fun. All right. Or if it's for the company, you could. This is where you can what I call cloud drop to show like how they work.
In my research, I was seeing Azure come up a lot. I was seeing Amazon Web Services, and not as much, but I did see it like once or twice. I think Google was also in there, but really Azure was
3 big ones.
Yeah, Azure was the one that was most used.
It's Microsoft, so C#.
Yeah, which would make sense. Again, like you said, C#, Microsoft is the main developer of that.
So specifically, what Azure, I don't know how you pronounce it, is basically they offer services that help you do different things. In this, for secrets, you want to use Key Vault. Okay, this was the name of the service is Azure Key Vault, and what it does is it does exactly what you described. It encrypts the secret, and then if you're a hacker and you look at it, you get gobbledygook, and then when you run your program, it decrypts the secret and then runs the program. Okay, so all we really need to do is stick the Azure Key Vault over the problem we're trying to solve. So that was actually very good. Don't be afraid. Here's the thing. Don't be afraid to figure stuff out during an interview. Is put your mind to it. I've done that before too, where I haven't done it before, but if I were to solve that problem, logically, here's how it would work. And that's gotten me pretty far.
Yeah, makes sense.
So it takes a little bit of courage to try doing that, but okay. So that was actually really good. What about, let's see, what's the purpose of middleware?
Okay. The research I was doing on this one was there's a lot of stuff about pipelines.
Yes.
I don't know the context of what a pipeline is as far as software engineering and computer science goes. This one is completely, I do not know what this one is at all.
Okay, so essentially we know what the HTTP verbs are. So when you work with APIs, what do you usually do with them?
If it's a GET, then I usually am trying to pull some information to process it and handle it, do whatever I want to do, post it up on a page or whatever. If I want to do posts, it's to modify some data or what have you. Same thing with the rest, or delete. But generally, it's when I'm dealing with an API, I'm really more about trying to do something with someone else's data.
Okay, so you send a request over to whatever API you're working with. They receive your request. There's a pipeline that processes the request. So you could think of a pipeline like a series of steps. Okay, and there's a set series of steps that says, okay, I got the request. I have to make sure the request is JSON. Sure, it's JSON. Is the request have all the pieces I expect it to have? Sure, it does. What's the verb? It has this verb. Here's the controller that it goes to. So there's a bunch of things it does with the request as it comes in before it hits the actual controller. It's
like the OSI network model then.
So it probably is. I don't know what an OSI network is.
7 layers of a network entirely. Starts with physical, ends with application.
Okay, so is that like a networking thing?
That is 100% a networking thing.
So how does it work?
First and foremost, everyone has their own way of memorizing the acronym. I personally prefer please do not touch Superman's private area, but a lot of people go, please do not throw sausage pizza away. And you start off with the physical. Layer 1 is always physical. Anything you're troubleshooting that's got to do with the network, what is the first thing you ask? Is the stupid thing plugged in?
Yes.
Done. Answer 9 times in 10 is no. Dang it. I'm sorry. The other 1 in 10, you're starting to get worried. So that's physical data, or the data link layer.
So it's like troubleshooting steps then.
Exactly. Because it's as you're going through, it's the various instances of ways your data, everything is being broken out and sent into honestly, the net being broken down into the network and then coming out of the network into, say, an application. And
Then
each
you
one
do,
of these.
then you do know what middleware does, because that's what middleware is.
Fantastic. Okay, cool.
It's not like for an actual like physical stream of data. It's for an incoming request to an API.
Gotcha.
Or I mean, it could be a website too. It could be a MVC application. But basically, I'm sending a request in. What steps am I doing with it before it hits the controller? And so, the kinds of things you might expect in middleware. So there's the default middleware that you get with .NET. It's just a default, and you don't touch it, and it does what it needs to do. Stuff you might actually need to do with it is, for example, to check people's whether or not they're logged in or not. Okay, so hey, like you're trying to access an endpoint that is protected. So have you ever used an API where it required like a token or a password?
Unfortunately, usually by the time I get to the point where I'm doing stuff against an API, I've already authenticated an SSH socket. So I do things more with SSH and less opening and closing a WebSocket or TCP/IP connection.
Okay, so it's over a socket. So you're still making a request, though.
No, it's more like I create a connection. So effectively, I guess it is a request because it is I'm requesting to connect to you. Server kicks back with give me your authentication, and I send back, hey, here's my username, here's my password.
Okay, so probably in your case, the middleware doesn't necessarily have to deal with the authentication because you have your authentication saved when you first made a connection with the server. So it doesn't need to do that. In other APIs, they don't do that. You just send a request, and along with the request, you send information about who you are. And then in the middleware could be like, oh, here's your token that says that you're Jonathan. I don't know if I believe you or not. Let me go check with the authentication store and see if you are. You can go through. If you're not,
is that where things like certificates come into play?
So certificates have more to do with, does the server trust that trust with the information that's coming in? So like certificates also help you with encrypting things over the wire. So the certificates that doesn't play that too much of a role in this specific case. It's more username and password, or what's called JSON web tokens. So sending a string which says, hey, this string is my ticket to the API. Go validate that the string is valid. If it's not, kick them out.
Gotcha. Okay.
So usually with APIs, I don't have to open up a bidirectional socket. I don't have to do any of that. I'm just like, here is a web request. I just chuck it at the server catches it and figures out what to do with it.
Fair enough.
Okay. So because otherwise it becomes a little bit too much, especially when you're using like third-party APIs where they have a bunch of people working with it. So I'd rather not have to deal with a low-level stuff like opening up connections and things like that.
Gotcha.
Another thing you can do with it is, for example, changing the request as it comes in or changing the response you send back. You can like fiddle with them, logging things, exception handling, like all that kind of stuff. Caching. Some people can do caching in the middleware layer. So basically anything you want to do with the request to response as it's coming in.
Gotcha.
As it's going out.
Okay.
All right. This is a hard one. Do you know anything about dependency injection?
Yes, I do actually.
Oh, go for it.
The reason
why? What is it?
Dependency injection is giving you when you, the programmer, are giving effectively whatever that you need is you're actually okay. I don't know the textbook definition, but the way I do it is when I create a function, class, whatever, usually in the constructor, or I know there's other ways of doing it. I actually just watched a video on other ways of doing it, but specifically the way that I've done it is when you do a constructor and you're creating a new instance of an object, if that object needs something, what you do is you actually provide it the item that it needs. So you inject, usually in the constructor, what it depends on. Dependency injection. I've been doing this mainly with, say, devices in control rooms or in devices in rooms. So instead of me going, oh, hey, I want to turn this monitor on, let me try and find to see if I have this monitor, I would just inject or place that monitor in when I create the room and say, cool, here is a monitor, tell it to turn on and off.
That was a beautiful example. because basically it shows you that you understand the relationship between object-oriented programming. So you have objects that depend on other objects. It is better to take an instance and inject it than to try to create it willy-nilly in the first object.
Because that's how you get null reference exceptions that I had to deal with for 2 weeks last year.
Do you know where it keeps instances of dependencies?
Where it keeps instances of dependencies? What do you mean by that?
So you have I love your room and monitor example, right? So you have a room, you have an instance of a room. So you have a room class, probably. I'm just throwing it out there. And you have an instance of a room. Then you have an instance of a monitor, and you inject the monitor into the room. Where did the monitor come from?
Specifically, it usually comes from another, or I guess in the main, and this is again potentially my experience, but effectively in my main, I would create an instance of a monitor, and then I would create an instance of a room, and then I would load that monitor into said room.
You did manually. Okay.
I'm working on getting it to be automated. I'm not quite there yet, but I do know that this is where you can do stuff with, say, interfaces, where you can, instead of requiring I want an LG monitor, I can say, I want anything that has an iMonitor class.
Correct.
And then you can use, again, going back to previous, JSON configuration file to actually go, oh, this is an LG monitor. We're going to spit this out. And then we're going to, now that we have a iRoom and an iMonitor, we're going to then effectively take the monitor that was just spat out, stick it in the room, and call it good.
Okay, so what you're describing is what you're doing it manually. So with .NET, there is an automated way of doing all that. It's called a dependency injection container. So what a dependency injection container is, when .NET starts up, you register all the dependencies. Here are my monitors, here's my cables, here's how you, and then what you would also probably use is a factory pattern to say, here's how you make an LG monitor versus a monitor A versus monitor C. And then basically, here's how you build everything you want. And the DI container will say, okay, great, I'll keep a copy of all the things I could possibly inject into other things. And then, like you said, with the constructor, you put in the constructor, you write it out, here's the thing I'm injecting in the constructor. And then the DI container will actually handle putting the object in there for you. You don't have to actually write any code instantiating anything and putting any things into the constructor. It will just say, okay, by convention, you wrote new room, parentheses, monitor, right? You wrote that there in the constructor. When it starts up, it will read the constructor and automatically take an instance of it and put it in there for you.
That's very nice.
So it's called the dependency injection container. And this is where like I said, bonus round, right? So they might ask you questions about scoped versus singleton versus transient.
Container.
Okay, the DIC, the dependency injection container.
Thank you.
Which, by the way, this also translates to pretty much any other framework like Spring Boot, like for Java or anything else. Yeah, they all have dependency injection containers.
I think I have seen instances of this before when I've looked it up on YouTube and various channels. The biggest concern I've had is that my language might be a bit too old for that, because I don't exactly know when those things were implemented.
Well, .NET provides you with one. So even though you're programming in C#, you may not be programming with .NET. So you may be just using the C# language and making a console app. .NET brings a bunch of extra tools that are written in C# in conjunction with what you're doing to, for example, automate your process. So what you're doing right now is manual dependency injection. .NET says you don't have to, worry yourself about that. I already have tools to do automatic dependency injection.
Got it. Okay.
So .NET brings with it tools like, hey, I can handle requests and responses in JSON for you. You don't have to open up a WebSocket. You don't have to do anything. I'll handle that for you. I'll handle the middleware. If you want custom middleware, then you can write custom middleware all you want, but I'll give you the basic stuff. So it's like a out the box. Here, if you want to make an API or if you want to make an MVC app, here's the basics of what you would need. And I'll automate all the boring stuff for you. And then you build on top of it.
Wow, that's very nice.
a lot of the stuff you don't necessarily need to bring all of .NET in. You can bring some libraries in too. For example, there you can have a library for the dependency injection containers, so you may want to look into that. That might streamline your workflow a bit.
I've seen a lot of people talk about various libraries like that, and it's
Right.
more. My biggest concern is which ones are MIT licensed and can be used by my company, and then which ones are actually trustworthy.
Exactly. So that's a whole big thing. But yeah, so it seems so. Here's what I'd say is a good thing about the interview: is you understand like why you need things, which is
Did I lose you, John?
have no idea why they need it. Oh, I was basically saying like the main thing is it seems that your biggest strength is you know why you need things, right? Because you solve problems. And so because you solve problems, it's I had to do this, I had to do that. And this is why you have to do it, because you have to get a specific result. All right. People who memorize the 4 pillars of OOP, very, very nice, but that's very like large scale and abstract. And so what's the pragmatic value of that? And then that's where the interviewer might be like, they know it attacks 2 ways. Some people really like people who know the book definition of things. But when I'm interviewing, I'm always thinking to myself, like, yes, that is what abstraction is. So do you understand why that makes it so that we're not screwing our program up? You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
Like, do you understand like why that saves us time?
Mm-hmm.
All right. So that's about all the questions I had for you. How'd you feel you did?
I definitely wouldn't have got the job, but I also don't think that I also don't feel bad. Like I feel like I got like 60 to 75% of the questions more or less understood, if not necessarily a solid grasp of. Not enough to convince someone else to let me run and be my own guide to do those things.
Yeah.
But not bad. Not getting the job, but not bad.
I would bring out a junior dev because here's from my perspective, like you're very teachable because you do have like technical experience. So you have the modes of thought, and you've also done things that .NET like automates for later. So it's like I don't have to explain to you what like dependency. I just have to label. You understand the basis for it. In that sense, you do come off as malleable. But yeah, I think more study. I think also if you maybe build your own API. Like it's like even like a little small one and test it out, that might help you with understanding the different parts of it.
Okay.
Because that would be a big thing, like building projects. I think for you, like practical experience is the best thing.
I am currently working on a couple of different projects, like personal projects, to automate stuff for myself at work. And I'm hoping that those will. And I did a project for a certification a while back entirely in C# that was running on a processor. I submitted to a couple people, and I'm like, I need to know how to do I want to improve this by adding more dependency injection. But yes, I wanted to lean more into the give me tasks to use dependency injection and interfaces, because those are things that I'm weak on. And so that's the goal of this project, is to work with interfaces and dependency injection. And I'm going to now explore what you were talking about with the dependency injection containers a bit more. And actually try and I'm going to try and develop a personal web app for my own use in my own house to see if I can do something with that, because I am planning on building a media server for if you're in my house and if I'm in my house and I want to go to my server and watch a movie or something like that on my phone, instead of having to just do it on my computer through Samba. I want to do something with C#, build the back end so then I can build the front end type of deal.
Sounds perfect. All right. Well, thank you, Doug. Hopefully this will be helpful to people who are thinking about interviewing and wondering what a tech interview might look like. Like I said, this is for like more like a mid-level company where they would like grill you more on like your knowledge of things. So later on, I will do probably one where we'll do one with actual data structures and algorithms, but that is for another day. Thanks.
You're very welcome. Have a good one.